Good afternoon. I feel a bit intimidated in speaking at this time of day. The previous speakers have raised the threshold very high for me, and I'm also confronted with the late afternoon after a lot of good food and the realities of intense jet lag. So I hope that I will say something that will be interesting to you. I'm speaking as the Vice Chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. And I thought it would be helpful to say a little bit about what the Commission actually does, so that then I can turn to the work that we do on Turkey, okay? The Commission is actually an independent, bipartisan commission. We were created by the United States Congress in the International Religious Freedom Act that was passed in 1998. And our mandate, the Commission's mandate, is to monitor the status of freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief as defined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international human rights instruments, and to give policy recommendations to the President, the Secretary of State, and members of Congress on U.S. foreign policy designed to ameliorate and end violations of religious freedom around the world. So our audience, our immediate audience, is the President, the Secretary of State, and the U.S. Congress. Now I'm going to focus obviously on religious freedom in Turkey, and my remarks actually reflect observations that you can find on the website for the Commission. The entire annual report is on our website, and the Turkey chapter with all of our recommendations is located on the website, and I can give you that address certainly if anyone's interested. Now, the background to our work on Turkey began in November 2006 when the Commission traveled to Turkey for 8 days. We went to Ankara and Istanbul. Until then, the Commission had not previously reported on Turkey. So that visit was actually a fact-finding trip to examine various religious freedom conditions in the country. Now, as a result of our findings, we continue to report on Turkey and in our annual report, and the following year we placed Turkey on our watch list. The watch list is a group of countries that require close monitoring due to the serious nature and extent of religious freedom violations that are either engaged in or tolerated by the states in question. So Turkey's remained on our watch list ever since, including this year, and the Commission has expressed our concerns about religious freedom conditions in Turkey. We have spoken at various OSCE meetings. We have communicated regularly with President Obama's office, with Secretary of State Clinton, particularly about Turkey's treatment of religious minorities, but about general religious freedom conditions as well. Now, we certainly acknowledge recent signs of possible improvement in the status of freedom of religion or belief in Turkey, and previous speakers have identified some of those hopeful signs. They include, as we heard, the liturgical celebration led by His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew at Sumela Monastery, the Armenian Orthodox liturgy at Aktanar Church at Lake Van, relaxing of enforcement of the headscarf ban that allows women, whether covered or uncovered, the relaxation that is, to attend university, reports that Turkey is going to comply with the European Court of Human Rights ruling and return the Buyukada orphanage building to the Ecumenical Patriarch, as well as a constitutional referendum recently passed, or jet lag is hitting me now too. The referendum that actually approved the constitutional reform package. One of the hopeful signs in that is that it's going to create an ombudsman's office in Turkey. So in other words, we see indications of positive change in Turkey, and we also see a fresh willingness to discuss and openly debate religious freedom issues across Turkish society, especially in the media. And our, 2 speakers ago, our friend Orhan Kemal Cengiz is one of those people who writes regularly in the media in Turkey. Having said all this, the Commission remains gravely concerned about serious ongoing violations of freedom of religion or belief in Turkey. And the real question for our work is whether or not the positive signs that we see will actually become part of permanent legal reforms and institutional changes that can address and eliminate those problems that have caused the Commission to designate Turkey a watch list country. Now, there have been 4 factors that have shaped our broad approach to understanding Turkey. First is the tradition of political freedom going back to Kemal Atatürk's program of nation-state building. This established a republic and constitution, but arising from the political program, as again we heard, the Turkish government and constitution have displayed an aggressive secularism, and that has severely restricted religious freedom in the public sphere, and it's also meant full government control over all religious activity. The State Department report has written about this, indeed speaking about, quote, the government imposing limitations on Islamic and other religious groups and significant restrictions on religious expression in government offices, state-run institutions, including universities. A third concern for us, broad concern, is that while every religious group in Turkey has been adversely affected by restraints on religious freedom, religious minorities such as Alevis and Christians face particularly acute restrictions compared to the Sunni majority. And then finally, a concern for us is that since its election in 2002, the AKP government policies are sending mixed signals on religious freedom. On the one hand, the AKP is reevaluating the policy of secularism as full government control over religion. They recognize that this has produced state violations of rights and practice. But on the other hand, it's very unclear whether these policy changes that are being discussed by the AKP will actually be fully implemented, and also importantly, whether they are meant to apply to all of the country's citizens and not just the Sunni majority. So those are 4 reference points for us that have are points of departure for our work. Now, it bears mention that the EU has shared many of our concerns about freedom of religion or belief in the country, in Turkey. And in February of 2008, the European Commission actually revised its accession partnership agreement with Turkey and set far more specific human rights and religious freedom goals for Ankara. Some of the previous speaker talked about the Treaty of Lausanne. One of the things that's been a point of concern for the European Union and the Commission is Turkey's interpretation of Articles 18 and 27 in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Turkey has imposed conditions on its commitments to protect the various rights for religious minorities, and this basically has undermined those guarantees related to professing and practicing religion. Let me give you just a short list of some of the particular concerns that the Commission has identified in our work on Turkey. And again, I'm going to be very elliptical, but I want to reiterate this key concern for the Commission, and that is that Turkey's current policies and relating to freedom of religion or belief seem to be marked by symbolic gestures and rhetoric and discourse, and a failure to follow through when it comes to implementing permanent legal reforms. So this is something that we're watching, this gap between rhetoric and symbolism on the one hand, and institutional reform and legal change on the other. Now, a few specifics. Restrictions on religious garb. Despite some signs of change, Turkish law continues to impose restrictions on wearing religious dress or garb in state buildings, including public and private universities, the parliament, courts, and schools. And of course, the most well-known restriction is the ban on the turban, the Turkish headscarf. And this ban has required Turkish Muslim women to choose between the right to education and the right to freedom of religion by virtue of covering their head if they wish to. Now, we see this gap between rhetoric and practice that I mentioned earlier. The Turkish Council on Higher Education, YÖK, recently issued a circular this fall saying that students should not be excluded for breaking the dress code. In other words, that universities should allow women who cover themselves to enter. At the same time, Erdogan has said that a new law, so the difference between an announcement and a circular and a law, he said a new law easing the headscarf ban can only occur after next summer's, in other words, June 2011 elections in Turkey. Another example, And just to close, we know that the ban on public religious dress is far more comprehensively applied and targeted at religious minorities, at non-Muslim groups. All Christians and Jews are prohibited. They have the same prohibitions that I talked about with the headscarf, but they're prohibited from wearing clerical garb in any public space, in the public sphere in general. So again, this constitutes a violation of freedom of expression. We heard about restrictions on Alevis, so I won't say too much about that, other than to say that for the Commission, we have noticed that these restrictions on the Alevi community are myriad, and we have been particularly focused on the issue of the Turkish government's failure to grant legal status for Alevi houses of worship, whether or not the rhetorical statements about abolishing compulsory religious education classes for Alevis will actually be implemented, and also other forms of indirect discrimination leveled against the Alevis, namely the requirement of religious designation on national identity cards, whether that will be abolished. A few other specific points. All of these stemming from the denial of legal personality. The denial of legal personality to religious communities, as we've heard a lot about that, generates a whole range of consequent and associated problems for religious freedom that are of particular concern for the Commission. And these include, for example, interference in the internal affairs and functions of religious communities, the imposition of arbitrary citizenship requirements on members of religious communities, their hierarchies in particular, and the application of a property rights regime which by any measure has utilized undemocratic laws and has breached due process and rule of law to confiscate hundreds of religious minority properties. So these are issues that we have been particularly focused on. Final issue, and again, I'd be happy to speak in more depth about these if you wish, but a final issue for us that we're watching and we're monitoring is the way in which there has been a ratcheting up of violence against religious minorities, persons as well as their property. So the Commission is concerned about questions in the will and the capacity of the Turkish government to protect all of its citizens equally, and in cases where violence has been visited against individuals or against property, to bring perpetrators of violence to justice, to try them in regular and transparent judicial proceedings, and then to use the penal system to impose a penalty on perpetrators of violence. And one of the reasons that we have been focused so much on this is, as I said, the ratcheting up of violent crimes over the last several years. We heard the mention of the Malatya murders, the murders of the Protestant Christians who were producing religious material. The assassination of Hrant Dink is yet another example. The Commission met with Hrant Dink when we visited. The recent murder of the Roman Catholic Bishop of Izmir, and desecration of Greek Orthodox cemeteries on the island of Tenedos only recently, this year. So concerns about whether through acts of commission to protect or acts of omission to fail to protect and bring to justice perpetrators of violence. These are things that the Commission is focusing on. And lastly, we are very concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism in Turkey. Anti-Semitic violence against, in the form of attacks on synagogues in Istanbul, and also anti-Semitic language in the Turkish media, as well as anti-Semitic hate mail that's been sent to Jewish organizations in Turkey in the wake of the discussion and the controversy between Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan and Israeli President Perez, both at the Global Economic Forum and then in the wake of the Gaza events. So this is a kind of quick and dirty of what the Commission does, the issues that the Commission is focusing on in our evaluation and our ongoing monitoring of Turkey as a watch list country. I want to reiterate as I conclude that our concern at this point is that we see this paradox emerging. On the one hand, far more open discussion of religious freedom issues in public, a lot of rhetorical gestures, but concerns about whether those will be matched with institutional change, legal reform, in other words, with follow-through. And since that has not been happening, we continue to designate Turkey a watch list country. Now, if there had been time, I would have opened my trusty BlackBerry and read to you some of the recommendations that the Commission does, but again, I'll guide you to our website. What I should say is that we make two kinds of recommendations when it comes to U.S. foreign policy and religious freedom in Turkey. Those are with regard to the U.S. government's bilateral relations with Turkey, first, and secondly, with the U.S. government's multilateral activities and relations and engagement with Turkey. And they go from the very general to the very specific. In addition to those, we work regularly with members of Congress, with caucuses in Congress, and we also communicate regularly with the State Department, the Secretary, and the White House on religious freedom issues in Turkey. So I'm at your disposal, certainly later on, to be a resource for any questions you have, and I thank you for your patience.